Our climate is changing rapidly. Heat waves, droughts, floods, extreme weather events. Are we ready to adapt? The challenges are many, but solutions are within reach. We can build our resilience and overcome the climate and biodiversity crises. We are connecting groundbreaking research and innovation to the everyday actions and choices of people, businesses, investors, and policymakers. Join the 5th European Climate Change Adaptation Conference. This is where Europe comes together for climate change adaptation. Get inspired. The time to act is now.
Nice video, an inspiring and energizing kickoff for today. So, hello and welcome to today's webinar of the European Climate Change Adaptation Conference 2021. I'm honored and delighted to open this final ECHA webinar under the title of Building Back Better, COVID Recovery, Resilience Building and Societal Transformation. My name is Petra Manderscheid. I'm the Executive Director of the Joint Programming Initiative JPI Climate, and we are based in Brussels. In JPI Climate, 19 European countries sit around the table together with the European Commission to align climate research activities towards the common goal of advancing and connecting excellent climate knowledge in order to ensure evidence-based decision-making in the field of climate. As JPI Climate, we are co-organizing this 5th edition of ECHA together with the European Commission, which started on the 25th May with the first webinar, thematic webinar in a series of 9, and will end on the 22nd of June with a high-level conference where key messages that are produced during the workshops like today will be discussed with policymakers and various actors in charge of climate action, in charge of change. So ECHA is the place to bring together practitioners for mutual exchange and learning about climate adaptation solutions. 2021 is certainly the year of climate adaptation that started with the first global summit on adaptation, the new adaptation strategy for Europe, and will end with expected progress towards a global adaptation goal at the UN Conference of Parties in November at the end of the year in COP26. The COVID crisis has emphasized once more the urgency of building resilience. For science, this means to accelerate the transfer of excellent knowledge to be used for climate action. From the previous webinars, one key factor we hear is communication, good communication of climate knowledge that can inspire for climate action. Today, we will shed the light on local aspects of societal transformation and the human dimension of climate change adaptation within a global context. This responds exactly to the mission on climate adaptation, including societal transformation, that Europe has pledged to accomplish. And to use here the words used by the Mission Board, there's an urgency to reach a climate neutral and resilient lifestyle, the Paris lifestyle. So we look forward to our inspiring exchanges, the positive sense of empowerment, and seeding curiosity to continue this dialogue. So I now have the pleasure to hand over to Elisabeth Worlicek. Elisabeth is a member of JPI Climate Governing Board for Austria. She's leading the action group on enabling societal transformation in the face of climate change, and she is the champion of today's webinar and a dear colleague. Thank you for your attention, and I give back to Elisabeth.
Thank you, Petra, and welcome everyone to this very last ECHA webinar. So it is really a pleasure that we have this opportunity here to come together after a series of webinars. And I hope that we're going to make the most out of this next 2.5 hours, and that we will really make use of the time that we have together here. So as Petra just mentioned, I'm the Austrian representative in the JPI Climate Governing Boards. I am also at the University of Natural Resources and Life Sciences in Vienna. And so we've been working for quite some time now on the climate change issues, climate change adaptation issues. And now we also realized over the last year that the COVID crisis has added some supplementary layers to sort of the issues that we've already been working on for some time. So now we're at the Climate Change Adaptation Conference, and now we have this COVID situation. Last year has really changed a lot. So we asked ourselves the question, what does it mean to build back better? So I know that there are a lot of different plans, national plans, European plans for COVID recovery, but what does it actually mean? And what are the issues that have to be highlighted? So in some previous scoping work, we found out that COVID sort of acted as a magnifying glass on issues that already exist, but they just really come to light now in a very, very massive way in some examples. So we are really interested in finding out today, how does climate change and COVID intersect? So what are really the points where you can sort of see things boiling up now? Or what does the COVID crisis also cover up? Has the attention shifted away from climate change? So all these kind of things. And so what we would like to find out now, since ECHA is really an opportunity where science and practitioners talk together, we would like to find out what can science contribute also to solving this issue. Solving is, of course, a big word, but what we would like to know is how can we work together better and what are the issues that need to be addressed. So I'm fully aware that after 1 year of home office and not meeting in person, everyone is already quite a bit tired of video conferences. So I really appreciate that you're here with us today and hope that you will also be able to get actively involved and to contribute also, even though it is a bit more complicated and tiring, and it would also be a lot more fun to meet in between and have a coffee together and exchange. But for the moment, this is what we have, and that's what we have to work with. So we are trying to make the best out of it. So now you may be interested in the topic, but why are we here today and what do we want to achieve with this webinar? So I think it's really important also to keep that in mind. What's the goal? What should be the output? Is it just coming together, listening to some people and then going home again, or maybe switching off your computer and going out on your terrace or whatever? So no, we really have a goal today, and that is we want to produce key messages, because there will be, for those of you that are not aware of that, on the 22nd of June, there will be the last high-level event of the ECHA conference, where there will also be a lot of representatives of the European Commissions. And we have the opportunity to show a video of 2 minutes where we can display key messages that we produce here today. Okay, so I mean, of course, you never know, will these messages be taken up or not? We will not know, but we will try to work on those at least to have the chance to get heard, and so that the output of these discussions here will somewhere be communicated in a way that it can be heard. So when we were planning this webinar today, we thought that it would be good if we have breakout groups. Of course, it is a challenge with a high number of people to have breakout groups online, but still we tried, and we thought it would be really nice to have a mix of science and civil society. So we're going to have 4 groups today where we're going to discuss different topics. And in each of these groups, there is one representative from an NGO or someone who is also closely working with NGOs, let's put it like that, and a scientist. So we thought that this exchange between science and civil society could be a really useful approach. But before we do that, maybe we should get back a little bit to why are we here and what are the issues that we are working on. So in particular, if you work in science, quite often you're getting so involved with your own research, with your own issues, that you sometimes forget why you're doing all this stuff. So that's why I would like to invite our 4 inspirational speakers of today to tell us a little bit about their own experiences and how they address different issues that we're going to talk about today. But before we listen to their speeches, I will just invite you to have a brief look up here on our agenda, just for orientation today. So if it's too small for you, you can also find the agenda on the webinar website. Okay, so we just thought if everything is virtual now, we want to have at least a really old school flip chart here. So if you can read it, it's even better. Otherwise, you can also check it out online. So we will first listen to 4 speakers that really have a lot to tell. Then we will go into breakout groups. Then we will go back together and see what are the key messages that these breakout groups produce. And then we will have a chance to listen also to the panel discussion with our speakers, where also you as the audience will have the opportunity to ask questions online. Okay, so as you can see also in the chat, the agenda has just been posted again. If you can't find it on the website, you can also download it here. Okay, so I don't want to talk any longer now because I'm really also excited to hear what our speakers have to say. And here I would like to invite our first speaker. Her name is Tasneem Essop, and she is an expert on climate, energy, poverty, and social justice issues. And she's also the founding director of the Energy Democracy Initiative in South Africa. So she's currently the executive director of the Climate Action Network International. So I guess most people that work in the climate change field have heard of Climate Action Network. And so prior to this activity, she was also head of the climate strategy and advocacy for the WWF's Global Climate and Energy Initiative. And she was also the head of delegation for the WWF team at the sessions of the UNFCCC. So that is quite a background. And she also had two positions as a provincial minister in the Western Cape and served as a commissioner in the National Planning Commission of South Africa. So that is quite a background and quite a lot of baggage. So we're really looking forward to listen to what Tasneem Essop has to tell us now. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth, for that introduction, and greetings to everybody. Thank you very much to ICA for inviting me to contribute to this very important discussion. You know, as you said, the world is at a crossroads right now. We, of course, experiencing the unbelievable impacts of a global health pandemic. We recognize that in addition to that, we are also experiencing in many places across the world the compounding impacts of climate change, and all of this, of course, at the same time, making very visible the existing fault lines in our societies. And I think in our conversation in this webinar, we should be exploring the intersectionality in all these crises. The one issue that I think, you know, has been made extremely visible, I'm sure for all of you, when we started watching the news, for example, about the impacts of the COVID crisis, is the fact that we have high levels of inequality and inequity in the world, not only between countries, but within countries as well. And when we look at the sections of society that felt the worst impacts of the pandemic, we will recognize that these are the same sections of society that also feels the worst impacts of climate change. And these sections of society are those who are and have been already marginalized in society, vulnerable, those living in poverty, those suffering inequality, especially those who are suffering racial injustice or experiencing conflict, people living with disabilities, etc. And recognizing this particular intersectionality between a health pandemic, the climate crisis, and other social crises, the social injustices that we're also witnessing, it is going to be important to draw lessons from how we dealt with the global health pandemic for how we deal with the climate crisis and other crises. And for me, the first big lesson, of course, is that we are going to have to address the vulnerability of those who are already vulnerable. As I said, those suffering poverty and inequality. That when we talk about adaptation and building resilience, our biggest priority would have to be to address those marginalized and who are on the front lines of these impacts. So that's one of the biggest lessons. And for that, I will come to talk a little bit about the solutions as well. But the other lesson that we should be learning out of how we've dealt with this crisis is the fact that even in the provision of solutions to the COVID crisis, so in other words, in the provisioning of vaccines, we have also unfortunately witnessed inequity. So we have a double whammy. We have the experience by marginalized, vulnerable peoples and communities of the devastation of these compounding crises. But then on the other hand, when the solutions are found, they are also the victims of an inequitable distribution of the solution, in this case, the vaccine. So I would want to ask whether or not our experience with this COVID pandemic is in fact a dress rehearsal for how we are going to deal with, or how we are dealing with the climate crisis. And I certainly hope not. I hope that what we have learned out of the COVID crisis, one of our most recent global crises, no one was left without impact. And so for me, the important other lesson therefore would be, is the idea of promoting the global good. What is in the public interest, both in terms of the pandemic and how we dealt with it, but also for how we're going to need to deal with the climate crisis. When solutions are found, surely these solutions, in a very important demonstration of global solidarity, and of course, as I said, solidarity with those who are bearing the worst brunt of these compounding crises. That is going to have to be the most important element of the way we respond to these multiple crises. So that's the second key lesson, that in the provision of solutions, we should also be addressing fundamentally the concept of global solidarity. For the solutions to climate change, and this conference is addressing, of course, building resilience, adaptation, and wider societal transformation, it's going to be important to look at adaptation in a continuum. You can't look at adaptation in isolation from mitigation, in other words, what we are doing to address the causes of climate change, right? So the more ambitious we are to reducing emissions, then adaptation is manageable and we can put in place resilience building mechanisms. The less we do to bring down emissions, the more we are going to need to do on adaptation. And then finally, of course, in that continuum is that obviously there are limitations even to adaptation as the crisis increases. And so we are also going to have to address the issues of losses and damages, which are already being felt, and again being felt by those who are most marginalized in our societies. So certainly we have to have that conversation. What does building back better look like? I understand, and we're going to have conversations with the science community. The science community, in fact, sent out these warning signals very early on, especially when it came to the connections between climate change and poverty and inequality. And in terms of the science community's findings, building resilience would essentially be about also addressing poverty and inequality. In the latest 1.5 degree report by the IPCC, for example, they go much further and look at the ideas that we can, in terms of solutions, that talks to issues of social justice. Scientists have come up talking about social justice, redistributive policies, respecting indigenous and local knowledge, etc. Now, so they've done a good job so far in building these intersectionalities in our understandings. But I would also want to argue that in many of our discussions about adaptation, we're looking at innovative, but also solutions that are quite, if I could call it, big in its scope. Whereas, if we get back to basics, and here I especially talk of those, especially in the global South, who are suffering poverty and inequality, then what does building resilience mean for communities like that? Simple things: access to education, access to clean water, food security, access to health, etc. So building resilience is not, just going to be about climate smart agriculture or looking at crops and, maybe looking at how you would change crops for food, etc. It's also about getting the basics right. So we have to draw the logic. Those who are most impacted on by this crises, as we have witnessed, it's not fictitious, we've witnessed it, are those who are most marginalized, suffering poverty and inequality. That means that our priority needs to be meeting the needs and building the resilience of those who are most impacted. And what does that mean? It means getting the basics right. It is all those things that many of us take for granted, but we have witnessed during the COVID recovery, when we can do social distancing, people who are living in informal settlements or highly dense settlements are not able to socially distance. People do not have the luxury to stay home when they need to get an income, etc. Same thing. And with a climate crisis, people who were trying to stay safe in COVID could not because they were displaced from their homes, etc. So that is the challenge that we face. This is the crossroads, I believe, for all of us. What is the moral and ethical pathway that we need to take? Where do we prioritize our attention, our solutions? What are we trying to fix and what are we trying to change? For me, it is quite simple. We have to ensure justice for all and that those who are most vulnerable do not get left behind. Those who are resourced can rebound. We've witnessed that. We've witnessed how rich countries are able to rebound. But it's going to be important for all of us to look at addressing inequity, addressing injustice in society as a whole, whether you're living in a rich nation or living in poorer nations. We are going to have to ensure fundamentals around building equitable societies and ensuring that we address poverty so that we are resilient enough to address these multiple crises. Thank you for allowing me to share some of my thoughts, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation and the engagement.
Thank you so much for this truly inspiring input. I think it is really important that in Europe we have so often focused on the Green Deal and European COVID recovery. So thank you for allowing us to broaden our horizon and to take other issues into account. Just reminding us there is more than Europe, even though this is the European Climate Change Adaptation Conference, but we're not alone on this planet. Thank you. So our next speaker is Irina Samuruyeva. She is an artist and a cultural geographer. She's originally from the Ukraine, and now she's living and working in Scotland. And she's currently working with the sustainability knowledge broker Sniffer. They're working on community-led climate change adaptation. And she works and walks across her own words, socially and ecologically engaged arts, co-creating experimental spaces for engaging with the more than human worlds. Irina, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Let me share the screen.
Sorry to interrupt briefly. If you cannot see Irina bigger, then you can either double click on the picture, that should make it bigger, if you're in the gallery, or you can also sort of slide also the size of the screen that she shares in her picture. So just technical issues. Sorry, Irina, go ahead.
No problem. Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak, and I'm really glad to be here with all of you today. Yeah, I'm here today as part of a small but powerful team at Sniffer working towards resilient futures in Scotland, but also someone who's an artist, researcher, and feminist. I'll share a gentle provocation to begin with, and for you to keep with you for the next couple of minutes as we move through. So risks have histories as well as futures. At Sniffer, we work with risk in a number of different ways, but today I would like to focus on why understanding risk both as futures and historical concept really matters through a lens of social impact assessment. The social impact assessment is something that we undertook as a part of Glasgow City Region's climate adaptation strategy development. And Sniffer, via our Climate Ready Clyde partnership, has led this process over the past couple of years with key public sector stakeholders in the region. So what we aim to do here is two things. First of all, the idea was to ensure this strategy does not worsen the inequalities associated with climate change in the region. And second was to inform the actual contents of the final strategy that is due to be published at the end of June. And it is a voluntary process, and when done, it's quite often done as a tick-boxy activity, but we have attempted to make it into a collaborative sense-making process. And what I mean by sense-making here is coming together to unpack the contents of the strategy and doing so in a collaborative, open, and a transparent way. So what that actually meant in practice, we had about 30 different community organizations that took part in a 2-day workshop that shaped this impact assessment process. And how we did that, that was during the workshop, we took a deep dive into some specific parts of the strategy and then looked at them with an intersectionality lens. So quick footnote, although many of you I'm sure are already familiar, and as we heard already mentions of this from the previous speaker, this is the concept that is originally developed by Kimberly Crenshaw, American scholar and feminist, to understand the way Black women were discriminated against in the legal court system and in climate adaptation. And for us in this process, we working together with Ana Amori Maya, who is a researcher at Lab for Urban Environmental Justice in Barcelona. We understood it as a lens through which to examine the overlapping and interdependent systems of discrimination at disadvantage that restrict people's resilience to climate impacts and create new or even exacerbate existing vulnerabilities. So by bringing the concept of intersectionality to this experiment with this sort of collective sense-making, the workshop participants and us as organizers and facilitators of this process have arrived to many insights, and a lot of them were about reframing or paying attention to different things. And I will share just a few with you. So first one was about shifting the focus, or attempting to shift the focus from communities that are hard to reach, as we often hear in different policies or programs, to institutions that are difficult to access. From seeing knowledge and skills gaps as being the big challenge, which to an extent it is, of course, to seeing the challenge in resources and land distribution inequality. And also from sole focus on futures when it comes to anticipatory climate governance, to acknowledging how past structural violence has shaped the current disadvantage. So the reason I'm sharing this example is to really allow me to make a couple of points today. These reframings that have emerged and that I have just made examples of through this process were really important, and this is about the need for spaces and methods for such collaborative sense-making of risks to allow for these kind of things to emerge. And the intersectionality lens, tools, or theory, however you'd like to refer to it, is extremely important too, because in our case, it allowed us to see and unpack the processes that actually generate vulnerabilities, and not vulnerability as an inherent quality of places or people, because it isn't. And this understanding of how vulnerabilities are generated is absolutely key to just resilience that we are talking about today. And as we see from the impacts of both COVID and climate change, that we surely might be very busy fixing the aftermath, as this performance of Ukrainian artist Bogdan Morozov, I think, nicely illustrates. But the question is, are we creating meaningful change at scale and addressing the root causes of these vulnerabilities? So finally, because the futures, and in that all of the concepts that we use to create those are not an existing things that are waiting just to happen to us, we really need to take extra care in how our future imaginaries shape our present day actions. And that future making that is done today by all of us really needs this collective institutional and, very importantly, political imagination, so that we are able in the first instance to imagine and then enact those socially, ecologically just futures. Thank you very much. That's all for me.
Thank you, Irina. It's really important what you pointed out, breaking open the categories in which we think and also thinking about the root causes. So I think this also trains up really nicely what we heard just before from Tasneem. So it's all kind of the same ideas. So the issue is more complex than just fixing things and paying and rebuilding economy as it was. So I think you both kind of got on the same line. It's really interesting to see that. Thank you. Our next speaker is Sigrid Stagel. Well, she's kind of the exception in this round of speakers here because she is today not representing an NGO. She's actually a scientist. But she's a very engaged scientist, so to say. So she works in environmental economics and policy and integrated sustainability, appraisal, and behavioral economics, just to name a few. I know that her field is a lot broader. She's the founder of the Institute of Ecological Economics and also department head of socioeconomics at the Vienna University of Economics. And she's also the co-director of the Competence Center, Sustainability, Transformation and Responsibility. And she was also awarded the first PhD in ecological economics worldwide. So that's quite a lot of firsts. And so she's been doing research on ecological and environmental economics in the US, the UK, and Austria for over 20 years now. So I think also that is quite a bit of baggage. And we also thought it would be really interesting to get her perspective also on the interaction with citizens and what kind of take she has on that. Please go ahead.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you very much for the kind introduction and for the invitation. I'll share my screen with you. So I'm speaking to you as an economist, so naturally it will be focusing a bit more on the structures. And there is one concern that I have, and I want to share that with you. Namely, when we had the last crisis, that was the financial crisis, so also an endogenous crisis and a crisis that came from within the economic system, because I consider the COVID crisis also as an endogenous one, because zoonotic diseases have a lot to do with how much we encroach on ecosystems. So after the last crisis, what we saw is in terms of the decoupling of environmental implications from economic growth, that the decoupling was weakened. So we see that here in this graph, and this is work by my colleagues, Astrid Bakri and Clara Zwickel, who have analyzed to what extent there is a difference from 1995 to 2015 compared to the period thereafter after the financial crisis of 2008 to 2015. So the latter one is a shorter period. The earlier one encompasses the shorter period, but it extends longer. So what we see here is a decoupling factor. If it is larger than 0, it is decoupling. 1 is a perfect decoupling, and smaller than 0 is coupling of environmental impacts such as greenhouse gases, material use, land use, and so on, and economic growth. So the good message is, the positive message is that we do see decoupling. We do not see perfect decoupling. That would mean that we have economic growth, but no increase in environmental impact. Yeah? That would be fantastic, but we are far from that. We do see decoupling, but the worrying aspect of this graph is that the decoupling was stronger in the earlier period compared to after the financial crisis. And this is not just an artifact of this particular indicator. It was really across a range of indicators: CO2, NOx, PM2, PM10, so particulate matter, the various versions, SO2, and so on. So across the various indicators of environmental concern, we have seen a decoupling, a weakening after the financial crisis. So this is something that we can no longer afford to have after this COVID crisis. So the it's important to mobilize transformative factors and regulation to promote the necessary change in economic structures and social practices, so that we are not bouncing back to a way of producing and consuming that is not sustainable. Monitoring and managing well-being directly rather than indirectly through gross domestic product can facilitate the transformation. And the COVID-19 crisis has opened a window of opportunities for change and for bouncing forward through adaptation and transformation. For example, new concepts of human well-being are being discussed, which include the strengthening of local value chains, social and ecosystem resilience, and at the same time, the reduction of social and economic vulnerabilities. On the other hand, we also need to talk about exnovation, not only about innovation, but also exnovation. What do we no longer want to see in a sustainable society, and manage the decrease thereof in a clear form. But more than designing policy instruments and activating decision makers is necessary, namely a paradigm change. And we live that at the Vienna University of Economics and Business in our department, that we see the economy as embedded in society and being embedded in the biophysical context. So from the start, we consider the economy as being tightly linked with the other systems. A recent study, a meta-study by colleagues at the University of Life Sciences, analyzed if achieving ambitious climate and sustainability targets should be reconciled with continued GDP growth. An absolute decoupling of GDP from the use of biophysical resources and/or emissions is a logical necessity. And what the systematic review of the evidence of decoupling of gross domestic product, resource use, and greenhouse gas emissions found is that a large, rapid, absolute reduction of resource use and greenhouse gas emissions cannot be achieved through observed decoupling rates. Hence, decoupling needs to be complemented by sufficiency-oriented strategies and strict enforcement of absolute reduction targets. And colleagues suggest very specific strategies that they call sufficiency-oriented strategies, including a ban on harmful activities, reduction of working hours, redistributive taxation, and so on. So what we need, in addition to an awareness of sort of the technical side, how gross domestic product is linked to environmental harm, but it's also a strong sustainability, strong sustainable consumption governance that is required. So we need new forms of solidarity. That resonates very much with the first talk that we heard. We also need a transition fund, and focus on growth and technology distracts from the great potential of the possible synergies arising from new forms of solidarity. We all know these rapid reducing emissions scenarios and the challenges that they are posing. Last year, under COVID, the emissions reduced by 6.4% worldwide. However, in order to achieve the decarbonization goals that various countries in Europe and around the world have committed to, we need to reduce the emissions every year by 7%. So the challenge is high. However, there's also a lot of potential, and here is one of them. The levelized cost in dollars per megawatt hours. What we see here is a comparison of solar PV, concentrated solar, wind onshore, wind offshore, and so on, compared to gas turbines, hydro, coal, nuclear, biomass. And what's really promising here is that the median value of the solar PV and wind is already, and hydro of course, but that's been for a long time, is already lower than the coal, nuclear, gas turbines cost. Meaning there's always been an economic case for the renewable energy sources to use them much more widely and really make that a base of a transformation and building back better, or building forward really. But now there's also a business case. This is really promising and important. And more broadly, what we probably need to discuss also today is biophysical accounting, how that can be done, the production logic as well as the consumption logic, accounting for co-benefits, accounting for the cost of inaction. The decoupling I mentioned already, justice, the distributional effects of financing the transition, also in terms of risks, linking the adaptation and mitigation risks, the physical adaptation risks, but also the transitional risks for economy and financial stability. We also probably need some visioning of the circular and climate neutral economies, because for many people, the transition is something very abstract. And visioning exercises probably can help, but then there's the challenge of participation versus speed. So on the one hand, of course, we need to act quickly within 8.5 years, reducing the emissions in Europe by 55%, the climate emissions by 55% is a stark challenge. On the other hand, it's important to do it in a participatory way and also a way that relates to people's lives. And then mobilizing transformative factors and regulation that can promote the necessary change in economic structures and social practices. For more substantive consideration of these points and also some practical examples, I've recently put together for the European Parliament a policy brief, which is illustrated here. Thank you very much for your attention. I look forward to further discussions.
Well, thank you very much for this input. So now we as you just showed us the numbers, so there are a lot of cases for really looking for a kind of transition, even if you say you've got an economic case for doing that. I think that's one way to put forward. And also thank you for this, the last list of things that you're going to discuss afterwards in the breakout groups. I think they're all really essential issues that need to be addressed. And maybe also this is a way of contributing to sort of taking away this fear of transition also from an economic point of view. So looking forward also to this breakout session. Thank you. Our last speaker, Ricardo Silva, is currently active at ECOLIS, that's the European Network for Community-Led Initiatives on Climate Change and Sustainability. And he's, for the last 20 years also, I think he's been involved in a lot of climate action movements, such as Extinction Rebellion, Ende Gelände, or Stay Grounded. And he even founded his own collective, the Camp Collapse, to support individuals on their own journey of socio-ecological transition. So I think that Ricardo really has a way of maybe telling us about what's going on within the citizen movement. So please go ahead, Ricardo. We are looking forward to listening to you.
Thank you so much for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. I will try to be brief, especially as I think already a lot has been shared. And I will share some quick notes that I prepared to present to you. First off, a little bit of context. So at ECOLIS, with a long name, the European Network of Community-Led Climate Action, we are a network of networks, and a lot of the networks that we support, they involve permaculture networks, eco-village networks, transition movements. We work with both grassroots organizations, so individuals, as well as policymakers. For example, one of our members is ICLE, which stands for Governments for Sustainability or something equivalent. So essentially cities for the transition. And the main point I'm referring to this is that what we try to do at ECOLIS is foster alternative ways of organizing ourselves, alternative ways that are compatible with climate adaptation. And so when we were invited to come and speak a little bit about transformative governance, it made sense. And so I think we resonate a lot with what has been said already, but hopefully I will say something a little bit interesting in the few minutes I have with you. So the objective is essentially, what did COVID highlight about how we organize our societies? What were the practices that emerged from the COVID shock? And what can we learn from this to deal with the climate crisis? As I was looking at the academic terms for transformative governance, it became, I thought it was interesting as well that that one of the reflections I found was that governance tends to be a complicated topic for many reasons, because it is a complicated topic, but also because it's not a super sexy topic. So I really like this quote to really transmit why governance is important. That when we try to change things, when we try to change the world to a positive way, it all goes back to a very common problem. How shall we work? How shall we come together? How shall we work together? How shall we create together? How shall we organize? And this is the type of governance that that I would like to remind us of. And so the main thing that I think is very obvious from the that we find that it's very obvious from the COVID shock is that our global institutions are fragile. Here in our privileged Europe, the main thing that we noticed was that we struggled to get toilet paper, but that was not the only problem. The global supply chains all over the world, I mean, we have medical teams that could not access essential equipment of protection. I mean, how ridiculous it is, because there was a snag in the supply chain. And let's not even talk about boats blocking canals, because that's another topic. But for example, while in the global south, there were countries that actually faced real food shortages because they're dependent on imports. Where I'm sitting in Germany, we had a very interesting problem, which was there were no people actually capable of harvesting asparagus, which is a delicacy for Germans. And so they had to find an exception to fly in experienced Romanians into the country in the middle of the pandemic. And you think, how is this possible? And so while we see the fragilities of the global perspective, we see the community rising up to address the needs that were arising. So from food kitchens showing up, from communities that were set up very quickly to say, okay, if you're at risk, we will deliver for you. We will be serving you while the pandemic lasts. There's no protective equipment. Okay, the local maker communities can pull up something that will provide while the institutions that are supposed to serve us have failed. The point being that yes, it's physical isolation, but not social isolation. And I think that the rise of the mutual aid is one of the most inspiring factors that came up through COVID. And one thing that is known in the academic literature is that disaster fosters the commons. Commons being the way of governing resources, not by state or market, but by community of users, self-governance, self-determination. And what the literature says is that social resilience is often associated with disaster, because unlike what usual Hollywood movies tell you, disaster does have looting, does have bad practices, but mostly, as we see, it's mostly turns us into good neighbors. And the point that we want, that I would like to highlight here is that in a very simple language, that actually tackling climate change can be done by being better neighbors. And so the examples that we think of immediately and that we see are that the communities that were already more self-sufficient, the ones that had, for example, strong community roots through urban farming, repair cafes, energy cooperatives, eco-villages, they were already more resistant to COVID, and they are the ones that are most positioned to be better resistant to the impacts that climate change will have on us. And so the question comes: shouldn't we be fostering this, the community-led responses, as much as we foster top-down technocratic approaches to climate adaptation? What we see from our perhaps biased view is that when we look at community-led responses, that not only they deliver climate positive impact, but they are already by nature more democratic, more equal. And if we look at the studies at the growing literature of studies, some of them were mentioned already by the previous speaker, we see that perhaps building cultures of sufficiency can be more efficient than actual technology, than technology-based solutions. And you know, it makes sense, because if we see like COVID, the impact that it had on us, a lot of it was because of our dependence on this on a globalized system. With the climate crisis, it's going to be even worse. We are dependent on a global system that not only it's based on the connections between countries, but it's dependent on access to cheap fuel, access to cheap materials, access to cheap labor. When that breaks, how are we going to have our needs met? And so essentially the call that we see in our work is that instead of trying to depend on a global system that faces increasing pressures to function, let's try to foster a little bit more self-sufficiency. Of course, this has a lot of problems, or let's say questions to resolve. How can we from a global perspective, from an European perspective, foster local communities? Is that not even a contradiction in itself? But most likely, local communities cannot solve the needs for everything, and global institutions cannot solve the needs for everything as well. So what is the role of one, and what is the role of the other? And just a little bit more shameless self-promotion. The way that we are approaching it at Ecolease is basically we are pushing for the concept of the communities for future, inspired in the movements of Fridays for Future and so on, which is trying to give more space for these communities that are already trying to live in a sufficient way, in an alternative way, to learn from each other, to benefit from each other, to foster the networks that will be resilient to the future that we need to create. That was enough of my pep talk. To give you a hint of what we will be talking later in the breakout room, we'll be trying to answer the questions. Okay, what can we learn from COVID about transformational governance? What elements of this are the ones that are useful to address the climate crisis? And what is missing, or what are the obstacles so that this is successful? And of course, most of all, how do we overcome these obstacles? I hope that's interesting enough to give a hint of what we're going to discuss. And I am done. I pass it to you.
Thank you, Ricardo, and thanks for giving us these insights in and also this sort of note of hope that I still have it in my mind. Disaster makes us better neighbors. I hope that we don't need to be these better neighbors at an extreme point, but it's kind of a bit of an alternative to the doomsday scenario where everyone just gets guns and walls and everything. So thank you for the positive note. Thanks a lot. All right, so we're running already a bit behind schedule. Surprise, but if people share with us what they know and their experiences, you can't just cut them off. So yes, but that means that we have to really keep track of our time now. You can see here now on our really modern flip chart here what we're going to do now. Okay, so we've got 4 breakout groups, and well, for those people that are still on YouTube because you thought that you could not get a slot to participate, well, the good news is you can join us here in the webinar. So just go to the ECHA website, echa21.eu, and then you can just click on the green button for join meeting, and you can actually directly join the Zoom meeting and participate in the breakout groups, because otherwise you will just have a screen saying ECHA blah, 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 breakout groups going on. So if you don't want it, if you want to participate, then I would highly encourage you to do so. Just go on the ECHA website and join via the Zoom link. That would be great. And for the other participants, I hope that you all logged on with the Zoom application and not the web browser, because the application will allow you to go yourself into one of the breakout groups in a few minutes. So also in the chat, you've got the Zoom to download. And if you don't know how to go into breakout groups in Zoom, if for the last year you never needed to do that in any other Zoom meeting, don't worry, just post the name of the group, breakout group that you would like to join in the chat, and our technical support will send you there. Okay, so I'm talking about the breakout groups. Now here you've got them all. Okay, so I will skip the introductions now. I think the breakout groups can do that themselves. So basically we had 4 speakers, we've got 4 breakout groups, and our speakers are supported by a scientist and also a rapporteur. And so they will be really selected the people that are in this group. So I'm sure that they will really make a positive setting for your discussions, because you have 1 mission now in this breakout group. Each breakout group has to create 1 key message. Okay, so just as a reminder, 1 key message for the ECHA high-level event, 1 key message that you would like to transmit to the European Commission. Okay, so really you have a very short amount of time, 40 minutes. It's really, really a challenge to do that. But we have one aim, and that is really to have one key message. And so I hope that you will be able to do that. So initially we were planning on having a break right now. Unfortunately, we cannot do that right now. So I hope that you'll still be able to sit a little bit longer in front of your computer for time reasons. But I think it would be really a pity if we would not make the most out of the time that we have. Okay, I also stopped talking now. You should have on your screen now the options to go into the breakout groups. So you've got 40 minutes, and I will sort of disappear for the next 40 minutes, and I will hand over to our NGO representatives and scientists that will guide you through the breakout groups. You've got 4 topics: social justice and participation, sense-making, cultural meaning and risk perceptions, transformative finance and economy, and transformational governance. You can go there yourself. You can just choose wherever you want to go. You have the name of the people leading these groups as well. So maybe if you're interested, just go ahead and join the groups if you can. If you can't go there by yourselves, again, just put the name of the group in the chat. We will send you there. Yes, I can see people disappearing. Great. The aim would be that no one's left in the main room afterwards. Still quite a few people here. Don't be shy. It's going to be good, I'm sure. And if you're still on YouTube, go to the ECHA website. Maybe we can post it again, the ECHA website, in the chat. Okay, so I can see people also posting in the chat which group they would like to go to. Well, technical support is going to do that. Please don't hesitate. Just go into one of the groups, even if you don't know what to expect. Just join them. It's going to be interesting. And you have your say. Maybe what you say is even going to be the final message for the high-level event. Yeah, don't hesitate. If you don't know how to go into the breakout groups, just put the name of the breakout group in the chat. You will be sent there. Yeah, just put the numbers. That's good. Still some more people have not made up your mind yet. Just deciding which breakout group you want to go. Okay, so if you don't know how to go there, yes, perfect. So we put the link here again to the conference site. If you are still on YouTube, you can join the Zoom breakout groups via the link that is on the screen now. Okay. I guess that's it so far. Perfect. So, technical issues? No?
There's quite some feedback.
Yeah, there's feedback from your side, Elizabeth.
I know. Okay, I think we get it sorted now. Thank you. Thanks. So I hope that you were all really productive during these breakout groups. I was kind of sneaking into one and the other, and it was really interesting to see that they all work quite differently. And I'm really looking forward to what you have to tell us now afterwards. So in order not to lose more time, because we were rushing you through this breakout group, I'm fully aware of that. So I would like to ask our rapporteurs to feed back into the plenary here what you kind of find out. So I would like to ask Veronika Karabacek from Breakout Group 1 to tell us on social justice and participation. What was your key message?
Yes, thank you very much. So our key message was that the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as the climate crisis, affect populations very differently, and that emphasizes existing inequalities and injustices. So we figured that fostering a sense of a global common good in a participatory way by bottom-up initiatives can help us in tackling multiple objectives and not just using our technocratic top-down approach, because this is more empowering, because we're not waiting for someone else to fix the problem for us, but we are all feeling that the global common good is our responsibility and gives us more more drive to achieve a solution.
Okay, thank you. That's a long key message, but
Sorry.
if you have it in writing, it would be great if you could post it in the chat as well, so that people can also read through it and get more of a sense of what it is. Okay, but it seems like a very important message to me. Thank you. And Alexander Fernandez, Breakout Group 2 for sense-making, cultural meaning, and risk perceptions. What was your key message?
Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth. Okay, so first of all, I need to disclaim that this was kind of a challenging task given the time we had, but I'll try to present you the key message that we captured in our breakout group, which had very interesting input. So what we came up with was that COVID-19 has worked as a magnifying glass, highlighting the interdependencies, interlinkages, and solidarity between the different elements of the web of life. And more than ever, there's this need and recognition that humans and nature are interconnected and are not separate elements from this web. This magnifying glass also highlighted the need for a balance between local and global issues, how they are communicated, and the critical role of science in achieving and maintaining this balance. So,
okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
It's awesome. I was thinking it's going to be one flash sentence, but well, reality is more complex than that. I can definitely see that. Thank you. Thanks, Alex. And Jennifer Hinton from Breakout Group 3 on transformative finance and economy.
Yes, okay, thank you. Ours is also a little bit long, but like it was said before, this was a really challenging task. So ours is something like economic policies and activities should focus on pursuing social and ecological goals directly, wherein money, such as GDP and profit, is treated as a means rather than an end to achieve the common good rather than private gain. This can be done using multidimensional and integrated social, ecological goals and information systems. Goals and progress need to be measured in global terms that take into account consumption and production-based impacts.
Thank you. Okay, that's also, yeah, I think it is long, but it focuses towards one goal. Again, please, all of the rapporteurs, post your key message in, yes, thank you, in the chat. Great, that's great, thank you. And Breakout Group 4, Ingrid Konix, please, the key message from foreign transformational governance.
Yeah, we have a slightly shorter one. Our key message is we must find ways to co-create knowledge for decision-making and behavioral change. This knowledge is able to address our perceptions and values and touches our emotions and gives faith, a hope. And in this way, we'll trigger community and locally led responses. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you. Nice and short. That's good. Also, please put it in the chat. Please, all of you put it into the chat. We need that for our output at the end of today's meeting. So please post it now. Yeah, great. That's great. Thanks a lot. Well, thanks to all the participants for your hard work. And I know this is a really challenging context, really to sort of collect thoughts. You don't have a lot of time. It's all just virtual. But still, I'm really happy that we have these key messages here, and we will hopefully produce something really useful with that and maybe even get the message out there. So that's great. Thank you. So that was the input that I was asking you. So now you can sit back a little bit and relax your brains, because now it's up to you to listen and just to maybe post a few comments or questions if you have to. But now I would like to ask our speakers back on the podium here, on our virtual podium, because I think this is now the time really to have a bit of an exchange. So we had these 4 breakout groups, so on topics that the speakers already worked on before, or they were quite aware that sort of these issues are going to get discussed, and where they also helped to draft these messages. And now just with the whole baggage of their own personal experience of the context of this conference here, and now also the creation process in the breakout groups, I would like to invite them back on here to have a discussion with us and tell us a little bit also about what was discussed in what way in the different groups. And I think this is also a great opportunity for our audience to post any questions or comments should they have to our speakers. Okay, so just feel free to use the chat and post your questions if you have a question to one of the speakers in particular, or in general, a comment or a question, feel free to use that. But I think maybe as an opening question, I would like to ask one question to to the 4 speakers, okay? And I would ask them to give it just a brief answer on that. And that would be, what is the one issue for you that has become more visible through COVID in the last year in the context of climate change? What is the one thing that has become so obvious now? Things that you maybe already knew before, or that in your own personal analysis you already knew, but that has become really apparent, or maybe even a public debate. So that would be my opening question for you. And I would suggest that we start in the same order as we did before. So Tasneem, maybe you would like to answer to that. And just since we don't have a lot of time, try to keep it to a rather short one element that comes to your mind immediately. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Elizabeth. And so I'm going to repeat what I said in the earlier one, and that is the kind of stark visibility of the inequalities that we knew existed before, but now came into our living rooms in a very sharp way that, you know, once you've seen, cannot be unseen.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, that's a clear statement. Thanks a lot for that. And the next person I would like to ask this question to is Irina. What's for you the one thing that became very obvious?
Yeah, I'm gonna go with your suggestion of saying the first thing that came to mind, and that's for me non-hierarchical care structures, which is a way to care for each other, not only humans, but one another in this peer support, mutual aid sort of way. But that's my
you rather see the positive aspects of that. So that's the first thing that comes to mind for you.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. That's also good to see. Sigrid, what is the first thing on your mind?
Well, there are a few obvious ones, namely that things like health matters, but also that there are some studies, empirical studies, that have shown that surprisingly, quite large groups of the population have reported higher well-being, albeit the COVID crisis. But what I wanted to say, actually, the one point that may be a bit more astonishing, a bit more surprising, is that as an economist, it was really interesting to see that if need be, we were able to distinguish what is more important economic production and more important infrastructure than less important. Something that at least the mainstream economic framework always refuses to make statements about. But in a crisis, we are able to make a distinction, and not surprisingly, but frustratingly, especially in these sectors, people are underpaid, and it's a lot. Mostly, it's women who are working in these sectors.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So it's about the possibilities that this situation showed us.
But distinguishing critical from uncritical economic production.
Okay, thank you. And Ricardo, what is your first thoughts?
I think my first thoughts can be summarized that from the macro level, what I think I said repeatedly, the incredible fragility and dependence that we have to forces and agencies that are beyond our control, and at the micro level, that we realize that. I was just inspired by you, Sigrid. The sound of birds is having nature next to us. That's so important, and it's something that I believe came a little bit back to mind.
Thank you. All right, we have a question from the public that also goes to Ricardo. What do you think is the crucial measure for promoting and implementing communities on a larger scale, going beyond established ways of living?
So, in a short answer, I guess, right? So, maybe I'll say a little bit too philosophical, but or academic. I don't know which. I would say that it's kind of the same narrative that the same narrative that is applied to ending fossil fuel energy production. I think it's the same one that can be applied here. The short message is, stop subsidizing industrial production. If you stop subsidizing, it's the whole irony of that we say the global economy emerges because of market efficiencies. Yes and no. Most of those market efficiencies are subsidized directly or indirectly. So the main thing that I would say, stop subsidizing and financing the global economy that has systematically and increasingly driven small-scale farmers out of business, for example. Small-scale style of living has been eradicated by the global economic system. So if you end that unfair system, then small-scale has a chance. Sorry if that was a bit too macro, but first thing that comes to mind.
No, that's fair enough. I just realized that Irina has not shared her first thoughts yet.
I have. That was the non-hierarchical care structure.
Sorry.
That was just so short. No worries.
No worries. True. Sorry for that. Okay. But maybe we can stick with you, because I have a lot of questions to our speakers. So, what would be the vision in 10 years' time? Maybe COVID is a memory from we think of now of the early 2000s or something like that, maybe bad fashion taste, or maybe, like an environmental crisis that was, just part of the, like the industrial age where, the sky is covered with coal, smoke would be like just a memory in the past. So what would be sort of the future that you would imagine in 10 years' time when people think back to the COVID crisis and climate change? What would you think, what would be sort of the thing that would have changed, like the positive vision that we would get?
Oof, yeah, that's a giant question, and I guess I'm not wanting to create any kind of global big vision that is applicable to everyone, because cherishing the diversity and the different ways of living, different ways of making life human and not human, I think is so crucial. So I guess the hope there is that a world where we have learned to treasure this kind of world-making, place-making practices of one another, and have learned what to prioritize, to what Sigrid was saying, right? Kind of like getting that critical perspective of like, these things matter, these things are good, and being very, very clear on what things are harmful, what things are toxic, what things are exploitative and oppressive, and kind of without recognizing that, it's very difficult to move to any kind of vision before understanding what things are causing harm and toxicity. So a more critical perspective on power structures and the toxicities that they produce is, I guess, my hope that could be a good foundation for living that kind of more social and ecologically just societies.
Thank you. And Sigrid Stagler, also from a structural point of view, what would be your vision?
I want to draw on some pictures that I still have in my head from various places, actually Vienna, but also here in Brighton, that the mobility has changed a bit, namely more people went by bicycle, and there were additional bicycle lanes being put in. But maybe take that a bit further, because that's what we have seen in the last few months. When taking that a bit further, I want to refer to a GP, general practitioner, a doctor in Austria, who was interviewed by a newspaper, and he said, from a medical point of view, what he would do, a single measure, would be to close off the inner district, which is the first 9 districts of the city of Vienna, to any private vehicles. Probably deliveries would need to be allowed, but other than that, so that people walk more, because there's so strong evidence that walking is so healthy for everybody, depending, independent, even if somebody is slightly ill and so on, just walking more. And then imagine what that does to air pollution, local air pollution, and what that does to the public spaces that we have. Suddenly not standing these metal boxes standing around and occupying all our public space, all the life that could come to the streets. We've seen a little bit of that, but I think we need more. And if we have a radical orientation on health, I think it comes naturally.
Thank you. And Tasneem, from your perspective, what would you think? The vision in 10 years?
So, yeah, we're so caught up in the now that 10 years seems so challenging. But what I would really like to see in 10 years' time is the kind of human spirit that we witnessed in the first phases of the COVID pandemic, the kinds of things that Ricardo spoke about in his presentation, and that human spirit, the sense of solidarity, the sense of mutual support, caring, the desire for connections, whether with people, families, nature, that human spirit is sustained over time, because our experiences of crises and disaster, etc., is one in which humans have very short memories. And so when the disaster and crisis seems to be over, we revert back to our self-interested behavior. And so for me, it is about sustaining that human spirit, that caring, that compassion, that solidarity. And in that way, co-create the kinds of future that we're wanting to see in 10 years' time. So yeah, it's sustaining humanity and not going back into self-interested care and greed, etc.
Thank you. So from the 3 comments now, I can hear that it's sort of for me, the vision, it all goes towards one direction, a feeling of being connected, of also of like including health just in the habits of, like, for example, walking more, like just getting the feet back on the ground a little bit more. So Ricardo, if you hear that just from the 3 previous speakers now, what do you think? How could it actually be implemented? Like if you work with different communities, I mean, it is easy to have ideas and visions how something should be, but how can you actually put that into practice? What do you think?
Easy questions all around, huh?
That's what we're here for.
The first thing that comes to mind, I don't think is an answer to that question, but I think one of the main incentives for the severe change that we're talking about, I think, is a little bit what we've talked about already, like that yes, it's we live happier, healthier lives. But you know, that might even seem a little bit conceptual. And something a little bit less conceptual to me is saying, hey, the first thing that we can talk about a more sufficient way of living is you work less. And that abundance of free time, I think, should be one of the biggest, juiciest carrots that we can put in front of the transformative change that we need. So that's the first thoughts. How do we do it actually? I know I feel tempted to go back go back into the dependency. Because I don't know, maybe I'm also too brainwashed by my business background. That I feel that you know, most of the changes that we talk about, they remain conceptual for us because, again, we don't have time to do it. And why don't we have time to do it? Because we are pressured by one form of pressure and another, that we need to work, that we have certain commitments and so on. And so the question becomes, how do we stop feeling this pressure? You know, and that's I don't have a clear answer to that. The self-sufficiency topic to me is very attractive there. It makes me think the more we can become self-sufficient, the less we need to depend on salaries that are paid to us, so we can be okay with a lower economic standard of living, but in fact we become much richer in other things. Is that enough of an answer? I don't know, but it is a direction that I'm willing to bet a little bit on.
Elizabeth?
Yes, please.
Could I also just, if you don't mind, I want an engagement.
Go ahead, yes. It's a panel discussion, so please, panelists, go ahead. Add on what the other panelists say.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm wondering, Ricardo, whether, you know, you work for an organization of networks that have many examples of you know, community-led initiatives, bottom-up initiatives, etc. I also know that indigenous communities have best practice, experience, knowledge that I think we're not valuing enough. And so in Sigrid's points about what we value, what we then see as critical versus non-critical, those indigenous practices and knowledge systems and history would also be helpful in this kind of shift in the way we view our societies and our economies in the future. So I'm wondering whether that, Ricardo, also isn't a point of connection in how we build these alternative systems of living, essentially.
Let me just resonate, or Irina, please.
If the direct response, go for it.
Okay, yeah, it's super quickly. Like it's just today as I was taking a walk back home, I was reading one paper came up with examples of examples of COVID resilience that show the way for the future, and all these examples were basically some, well, not all of them, but a lot of them were indigenous inspired, and so it feels. And to me, what it strikes me is that we tend to have a lot of these conversations about new values, new ways of living, and so on. And I mean, what I hear from that is that I recognize that it's a bit nonsense what we're saying. You know, like we are, you know, we are rediscovering what others have practiced for ages. So to me, it's so much a topic of that yes, we should be excited about these values and about this exploration, but we should also be humble about it, and this humility by looking at these communities that practice the values that we should be practicing. I think that's key, but I don't know how to make that concrete, so that's why I hesitate as well.
Can I just add on that? I think is that just expanding that notion of like, who we learn from, like who is we in general, and something that I've picked up from the chat of people talking about the sort of human spirit in this collaboration, and something that I want to throw in here as well, that this cooperation, care, mutual support is really not a monopoly that we as humans have, but right, there are so many fantastic examples of other creatures supporting and caring for each other. I think trees and forests are like incredible example of like this so many cooperation and symbiosis going on in there. And I've also just very recently learned about the very special kinds of British birds that have learned to cooperate to open milk bottles that were delivered to people's doors as a way to like, oh, there's something exciting. How can we learn to open it? How can we do this together? So kind of, I think, learning from other species and caring also for them and learning how they cooperate and kind of rejecting the story of competition that has been imposed from this natural world, supposedly, I think is so important. And I'm linking back to what I think Ricardo was also saying about the need to understand of, yeah, what you resist, what kind of stories, practices, ideas that you're trying to resist and what you're trying to create.
And while it is important to remind ourselves of what we have in common and the potential of cooperation, I think it's still important also to be aware of or remind ourselves of the differences in the sense of who will be more affected by a socio-ecological transformation, and to be aware of how which groups are affected, who benefits from it, who might bear the main cost, and how we can change that. So I force my students often to say we. On the other hand, of course, I love the notion of we all together, but then still be more specific when talking about who has responsibility, who has action, who can take action, and so on, to be more as specific as we can.
I think that that is a really important point, and I would also like to come back to what was said about indigenous knowledge or traditional ecological knowledge in general. Maybe also from your own experiences. I mean, if you see it from a post-colonial point of view, the various colonizing countries have tried for a very long time to get rid of this kind of knowledge and to sort of explain what should be done. And now I can see from a lot of indigenous groups also this initiative coming back saying, well, 100 years ago, you sort of like took away our way of life, and now you're coming back to us again, asking for us to share with you how we deal with all these kind of things. So, I mean, there's also this question of justice and equality coming in here. And having said that, the European Green Deal, it was also mentioned briefly in the chat, it focuses very much on growth. It's sort of still the same mindset. So I think the people that are in the virtual room here today kind of have similar ideas. But how does this connect with what does Europe? In which direction do we move as a collective? And also how is Europe perceived outside of Europe? And also within the different, and when I say Europe, also we also said just before, there are also different groups within the European populations that have different possibilities and different vulnerabilities as well. So how can we sort of manage to address the European Commission, in our case, directly, or also just how these different policies and strategies evolve? So how can we reach the people that still want to continue down the same path that we did like 150 years now? How can we go down the road? How can we reach them? Because I think most people here are have sort of more or less the same ideas, but how do we get out of this bubble? What can we do about that? I can see Ingrid again, Sigrid, sorry, responding to that.
Maybe to make a start, I think it's important there to differentiate. Different contexts, different situations require different policy response. And I think with the European Green Deal, the European Commission was struggling with that, because on the one hand, they had the rhetoric of it's a growth acceleration program. In some of the text, it was explicitly like that. And on the other hand, the European Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, also talked about, well, we need a different paradigm. We really need a different orientation towards well-being and so on. So it's not compatible. It's not the same thing. Yet they were talking about the same instrument. And maybe they were talking to different constituencies. Of course, Europe is not heterogeneous. There is quite a disparity. And the answer, I think, that we need to come towards, and this is following the Sustainable Development Goals, namely to move away from the idea that there are some developed countries and then there are some underdeveloped countries. No, all countries need to develop in Europe, all regions, and so on, but in a different way. Those that are rich have too high of a material footprint, a carbon footprint, and so on. And those who are poor need to have more income in order to overcome the poverty. And at the same time, we have some transactional effects, such as, well, green innovations, green technologies need to be rolled out more broadly. We need much more stringent regulation, and so on. Yeah? But in a more differentiated way, much more context-specific analysis, less of blueprints and less of general rules and principles.
Elizabeth, from a non-European perspective, I would say that the best thing that the European Commission could do is to not try, as they are right now, to export their model of a Green New Deal on the rest of the world. And I exactly say that for the kinds of things that Sigrid's just saying. There just has to be acknowledgement and respect that conditions, circumstances, cultures, histories are very different in different countries. And so just to be a bit humble that Europe isn't the center of the world with all the answers and all the solutions, and help in a co-creation way, because I'm sure Europe can learn so much from other places in the world as well. So my one suggestion as a non-European would be, don't think that all the answers come from Europe, and please do not try and export your particular model of a Green New Deal.
Thank you. Thanks for the reminder. That's a very essential one. It's just it seems that we seem to be very resistant against learning. When I say we, of course, I exclude all of those that are here in the room today. Of course, yeah, don't worry. But yeah, thanks. I think that's a really very essential point. Do we have any more feedback on this issue here from our panelists?
Unless Irina wants to jump on it, I can have a couple of thoughts. Yeah, my perspective is I think as Sigrid pointed out, the Commission, as a very complex body, faces a lot of pressures from different constituencies, and it's a process that I do not envy them, but we should hold them accountable. So my perspective is, how can we influence the Commission to do, to work towards the direction that we need them to work on. And I think there's already a lot of work, and Sigrid, already I think mostly in your presentation, you already hinted at essentially what I think is the first message that needs to be clear to the Commission, which is there is an alternative. There is an alternative that makes more sense not only at the human and ecological level, but even at the economic level. And I mean, to me, this is the part that is shocking, that is still news, but I think the message is slowly getting there. So that's from the economic point of view, and from the political point of view, what I would say is that we need to hold the Commission accountable. We need to hold all our decision makers accountable for one of the key aspects that the Commission and the European bodies are responsible for, which they are responsible for holding a democratic space. Our structures, our communities, our cities, our countries, they need to be democratic. That means that we need to be empowered. And if we remind them that there's a very big difference between a European Green Deal, which is imposed, rather than a European Green Deal, which is co-created, that is already quite a huge difference in shift. And yeah, well, I could talk about greenwashing and democracy washing and so on, but it's something that we have to deal with and work with. But I would say that in our position, the main work that we need to do is to keep holding them accountable and keep reminding them of what is real climate action and what is real, democratic action, let's say.
Just to add, I think, a couple of points, but I think I can't agree more with absolutely everything that was said. But to pick up on some things that people are posting in the chat, also, it's that kind of abandoning the this colonial gaze of like mission-driven blueprint production of methods that are supposedly to be exported all over the world, which is exact same logic that, you know, that had the colonialism and all those things that have got us into this big trouble. And I think there's so many excellent examples that, you know, if we think about more like policy spaces of what can be done in those spaces, right? Reparations, that's one massive part of the conversation that is extremely uncomfortable. Various countries in the EU, I think, are tackling that with various degrees of success, those for whom it's relevant at least. Lots of examples from, I think, New Zealand, or drawing together the indigenous frameworks of thinking about the world, actually making them to the law, like giving a water body a legal status, for example. You know, if we live in the world where corporations have legal rights, is it so crazy to imagine that a river can have also legal right and representation? Yeah, and the whole contradiction that Sigrid was talking about, I think, that kind of trying to do the good work, but also not leaving the idea of economic growth behind. That's, yeah, just it's difficult to roll on with anything meaningful as long as that is, and there's an attempt to balance that. And also, yeah, being, I guess, inspired by supporting and being part of the all sorts of movements around the world. Like yesterday, it was all over the news with the Keystone XL pipeline getting cancelled. Like that is a massive, massive news that emerged from the very bottom-up grassroots movement of resistance.
Yeah, thank you. I think I could see all the participants here sitting together, maybe in under a shady tree somewhere, and keep on discussing maybe the whole evening, the whole night, which would be awesome. I can see that people are starting to get into it now. So now that all the work is done, and now we start the discussions, and I'm really, really grateful for this kind of exchange. You know, as it is with these kind of formats, at some point you have to say, oh, on Sigrid's garden, yes, that would be a good idea. Sigrid, do you offer your garden for our chat? No, I think this would be really, really great to continue the discussions. Unfortunately, as you know how it is, we have to sort of come to a close with the discussion here. But since we were kind of, you know, taking on this positive dynamics of sort of a very positive, constructive spirit, and that's also what I really appreciate in here. Just for all our panelists, maybe just as a closing word, what is the message that you, well, the message for the European Commission, we already worked with that just before, but what would be the message that you would like to give to the participants of this session when they leave, when they turn off the computer now, afterwards, hopefully after our webinar and not a lot later, but when they close the computer, what is the key message for them that you want to give them on the way? Tasneem, please, what would be your key message?
Thanks, Elizabeth. So I think my key message would be, when you switch off your computers, you might not go into Sigrid's garden, but just acknowledge and recognize your own power and agency, especially to change things.
Thank you. Okay, so what would be Irina's message?
Let's practice multi-species solidarity and go and spend some time with other creatures, including humans and the trees and the birds and all sorts of that out there, and live as if ours and theirs lives mattered.
Thank you. Sigrid, what would be your message?
Win-win solutions are great, and of course we go for them. But the most important change that we have seen, progress that we have seen in our societies, have come as a result of conflict. It's nothing bad, it's just something necessary.
Thanks. And Ricardo, your message?
Very good messages. That's oof. Maybe I'll just say, value your community and the communities that you see around you. The value for they are bigger than you might think they are. And yeah, as was said already, yeah, try to think how can you serve those around you. It starts with being good neighbors.
Thank you. Thanks to all four of you. I will really, personally, I will take your words home with me. And I was kind of expecting that this would maybe just sort of like also be a webinar where people just say things, but I can see that people also feel things. And I think maybe that may be a step into the right direction. So, but before I let you off the hook now, we had another person working silently in the background now that we've been talking. And I would like to ask Marie-Pascale Karppinen now to come here into the room, because she's been working on the key messages, and she's a graphic artist, and she is going to be the one that will make our video for the high-level event for the European Commission. So she tried to capture your key messages in pictures, okay? So what she's done now is just really a very rough draft, I guess. So she will continue working on this and we'll make a short video out of this. But please, Marie-Pascale, go ahead, share with us. What have you got?
So I'm going to share my screen with you. This has been, it's been an intense day for you. It also has been an intense day for me. So give me a second to share my screen. Okay, now I can see my screen, and I'm now going to go to the pictures. So let's start with group number 1. Elizabeth, do you want to say something about it? Or shall I?
Yes, maybe it would be interesting. What did you capture from what sort of like not being part of the discussion? What's the essence that you got out of it? And also, having said that, please also the contributors and the rapporteurs from each group, if you feel that something got interpreted a bit in a different direction than what was initially thought, do not hesitate to get in touch with us afterwards. Okay, please take your notes and get in touch with us.
Yes, you can always get in touch with us right into the chat, so it doesn't get lost. Yeah, so the main point here already, like in inspirational speak, was like the intersection between the climate crisis, social injustice, existing inequalities, and like how the health pandemic made all of it even clearer. And then now the main message from the breakout groups was that the goal is actually the global common good, and that by aiming for the global common good, we can tackle multiple objectives. So basically the solution to the problem that was shown before, and all of that in a bottom-up way, empowering people. So that was the group on social justice and participation. I'm gonna, because we don't have so much time, immediately gonna switch on. Here I also had a little bit of a chance to look into the group, what they were doing in the group, for about sense making, cultural meaning, and risk and perception. And here I especially like the image of the web of life, where COVID as a magnifying glass shows like we are all very connected with each other, like human and non-human beings, and also the global and the local level are actually very connected with each other, and all of that has just became more visible again through COVID as a magnifying glass. And then switching to the money discussion, transformative finance and economy. And here, yeah, the basic message that I got also from the discussion in the group is that money should be not an end, but a means, and actually for a common good. So we have got here the society, which should be in the focus. So we actually need like a change of perspective here, like from an inside view to an outside view. Actually, who is the whole economy and finance serving? And yeah, basically it's also like the common good. You see, the common good is something that shows up in all of the groups, and also yeah, the decoupling that was in the inspirational speech. And with that, I'm getting to the last group, which was transformative governance. And here, like the main goal for the solution was to co-create knowledge together for decision making and behavioral change, to like basically move all of our perceptions, our values, emotions, and create some sort of hope. And from that, trigger a locally led response that might be much more stable than the global system, global institutions that we have now, and which as the COVID climate, COVID crisis showed, is can be quite fragile and in global crises. So yeah, foster a local response. That's it from me. I'm going to give you back the screen.
Thank you so much. This is really, it's so intriguing. It's like, you can look at all the details, and I know how she works actually. In her video, there will be little animations in the pictures as well. And she will surely do some fine tuning, but I'm really impressed again how you're able to capture the essence of discussions like that, also within such a short amount of time. So really a big thumbs up also from our side. This is really great, and I'm really looking forward to your video. And I'm sure that, we hope, and no, I'm pretty sure that even at the high-level event, this is something that is not very usual, how you can present results. And I hope that it will capture the attention of the attendees that will be over there as well. So what we will do, we will, of course, also share the video with you. So you will see it at the high-level event on the 22nd of June. So we will show it there, that's for sure. But if you, for some reason, cannot make it there, we will also share it on the JPI Climate website and on the various social media channels, of course. So, yeah, so I'm really looking forward to that result. And thanks again, Marie-Pascale, for this really, really very hard work and very concentrated work. And the result is great, and I'm looking forward to that. So Marie-Pascale has just posted her contact in the chat. Do not hesitate to reach out to her. Working together with events like that, that's really great. So highly recommend. Okay, so this is almost the end of our webinar today. And I would have to thank to a lot of people also for supporting the organization of this webinar, but there's in particular one person that a lot of you also had a lot of exchange with over the last few weeks. Martina Heidel, would you please come up on stage with me here? Because she's working for the JPI Climate CSA called Sincere, and she was really the greatest support that you can imagine in handling this webinar. And so maybe you've met her before. And so she's been the one that you've been communicating all the time. And so I'm really grateful that that we were able to set this up together. And she did really a great job. Thanks a lot, Martina.
Well, thank you, Elisabeth. And thanks for everyone for this really, really inspiring webinar. I think we all had a lot of takeaway messages from today. What really stuck me is like, let's sustain humankind. Let us really be the inspiration we want to see in this world, and let us do that now. It's the time now. Beautiful. And I also want to thank everyone for making this happen today. There's so many people involved. For example, all our inspirational speakers who did an amazing job, for the audience who was really engaged, as you can see in the chat room, for all the people in the back, all the ECHO people supporting us here, and especially Elisabeth. Thank you for your very inspiring and heartfelt moderation, and it's a blessing to work with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Martina. Thanks. Well, and thanks to all of you for bearing with us in these challenging times of way too many webinars and way too dense screen time all the time. I really enjoyed having you here, and I could feel that at least most of you, the ones that were behind the screen, were really engaged as well. And thanks a lot. And also, again, a lot of big thank you to our speakers, our scientists, our rapporteurs, and everyone involved, and the people at VO and the JPI Climate. I could continue like that, but I just stop here. thank you. And I'm really glad that we managed to finish this last one webinar here. And if you have any thoughts about anything, just don't hesitate to get in touch with us. And well, we will surely write back at some point, because now we have more time again, since we do not have to organize this webinar anymore. Okay, thank you. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon and hope to see you soon in real life at some point again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.